Welcome to Insight Lens, where we uncover the hidden strategies, the men behind the power, and the moments that reshaped history. Today's dossier, Dmitry Medvedev, the man whose words echo like gunfire and whose threats are rarely just words. For decades, the world has watched Vladimir Putin as the face of Russian power. But standing just beside him, often underestimated, is Dmitry Medvedev, lawyer, loyalist, former president, and today, the Kremlin's loudest, most unfiltered voice. From war in Georgia to shutting Europe's gas valves to threats of nuclear fire, Medvedev has proven he is more than just a shadow. This is the story of Russia's iron-tongued statesman, the man who speaks the Kremlin's darkest truths. This is Dmitry Medvedev, the man often described as the most hot-tempered figure in Russian politics. He is neither Russia's longest-serving president nor a battle-hardened general, and yet, every time he speaks, the world freezes, like hearing the metallic snap of a rifle boat being pulled back. In March 2023, when the International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant for President Putin, Medvedev lashed out immediately. He warned that any attempt to detain Putin would be treated as nothing less than a declaration of war. He even reminded the world that Russia still possessed nuclear weapons and would not hesitate to use them if its leader was harmed. It was not a joke, nor an exaggeration. 2 years later, on May 3, 2025, Medvedev went even further. Writing on his Telegram channel, he delivered a chilling threat. If Ukraine dared to provoke Russia during the upcoming Victory Day celebrations, there was no guarantee that Kyiv would remain on the map by May 10th. To many in the West, this was just bluster, another round of fiery rhetoric from Moscow. Some analysts dismissed him as a noisy sideshow, a man used by the Kremlin to flood the airways with extreme statements. But history tells a very different story. Medvedev is not merely a loudspeaker for Putin, nor a politician who talks for effect. His past shows that when Medvedev makes threats, they often foreshadow very real actions, military, economic, or strategic. To see this more clearly, we must rewind to his first months in power. The year was 2008. Medvedev had just stepped into the presidency after Putin shifted to the role of prime minister. Many observers, both inside and outside Russia, assumed Medvedev would be a quiet caretaker, a young scholarly figure without political muscle, a mere shadow trailing behind Putin. But within weeks, a crisis exploded that would prove otherwise. The summer of 2008 would put Medvedev to the ultimate test. Barely 3 months into his presidency, having secured 70.3% of the vote in March, he faced his first war. On the night of August 7th to 8th, Georgian forces launched a sudden assault on Tskhinvali, the capital of South Ossetia, a region populated by thousands of Russian citizens. For a moment, many believed the new and untested president would hesitate. After all, Medvedev was seen as a bookish lawyer, not a wartime leader. But hesitation never came. Within hours, Medvedev gave the order for a full-scale counteroffensive. Over the course of 5 days, from August 8th to 12th, Russian troops surged deep into Georgian territory, dismantling much of the country's military infrastructure and overwhelming its defenses. By the end of the campaign, Georgian forces were in retreat, and the Kremlin had made its point. Russia would not stand by while its sphere of influence was challenged. Then came the decisive move. On August 26, 2008, Medvedev signed decrees recognizing the independence of South Ossetia and Abkhazia. It was a dramatic geopolitical shock that permanently reshaped the Caucasus. The economic toll on Georgia was severe. In 2009, GDP contracted by -3.7%, foreign direct investment collapsed by 58%, and the budget deficit ballooned to more than 9% of GDP. For a small nation already struggling, it was a crippling blow. Western analysts, many of whom had mocked Medvedev as a shadow of Putin, now saw a different reality. The young president had shown that he was capable of acting decisively and ruthlessly. His decision in Georgia demonstrated not only military resolve, but also a willingness to redraw borders by force, something Europe thought belonged to the past. By the end of 2008, one thing was clear: Dmitry Medvedev might not have looked like a wartime leader, but he was prepared to wage war to protect Russian interests. If Georgia had revealed Medvedev's willingness to use force, the next year showed the world he also knew how to weaponize energy. In January 2009, Russia's patience with Ukraine snapped. Kyiv owed over $2.4 billion to Gazprom and had failed to reach a new price agreement. Medvedev authorized a drastic measure: cut off the gas supply. At first, only flows into Ukraine were halted, but by January 7th, Moscow shut down the pipelines carrying Russian gas across Ukraine to Europe. The consequences were immediate and brutal. In the depths of winter, when temperatures in Eastern Europe fell below -10 degrees Celsius, the gas lifeline went silent. Within days, 18 European countries were affected. Entire factories in Slovakia, Bulgaria, and Serbia went idle. Households across Central and Eastern Europe shivered in the cold. Governments scrambled to activate emergency reserves or strike hasty deals to import alternative energy, often at enormous cost. This was no accident, and certainly no outburst of emotion. It was a calculated demonstration. Medvedev understood perfectly that Russia's most powerful weapon was not always the missile or the tank, but the gas valve. By closing it at just the right moment, he could apply maximum pressure on both Ukraine and Europe, while minimizing Russia's own losses. The crisis made one truth undeniable: Moscow's energy empire was as formidable as its military arsenal, and Medvedev had just shown he was willing to wield it without hesitation.
By 2010, Medvedev no longer looked like an untested caretaker. He had shown he could fight a war and choke Europe's energy supply. Now, he was ready to test the patience of two global powers. On November 1st, 2010, Medvedev flew to the island of Kunashir, part of the Southern Kurils, territory Russia had seized at the end of World War II, but which Japan still claims as its northern territories. Medvedev strolled the island, posed for photographs by the rugged coastline, and declared it a vital part of Russia. The move was unprecedented. He became the first Russian head of state ever to set foot there. Tokyo's outrage was immediate. Japan recalled its ambassador and condemned the visit as a grave insult to national sovereignty. Medvedev, however, refused to back down. His message was unmistakable. The Kurils were not a bargaining chip. They were Russia. The same year, tensions with NATO escalated. The United States announced plans to deploy elements of its missile defense system in Eastern Europe, with sites in Poland and Romania. Medvedev responded with a sharp warning: Russia would take adequate measures. This was not empty rhetoric. As early as November 2008, he had threatened to station Iskander missiles in the Kaliningrad exclave, right on NATO's doorstep. Though permanent deployments came years later, the threat itself rattled European capitals. It was a blunt reminder that Russia's missiles could reach deep into NATO territory within minutes.
Dmitry Medvedev was not born a general or a strongman. He came from academia, a law professor at St. Petersburg State University. In the early 1990s, he crossed paths with a then little-known city official named Vladimir Putin, both working under the reformist mayor Anatoly Sobchak. That relationship would define his career. By 2008, when Putin's first two presidential terms ended, the Kremlin needed a trusted successor, someone who could preserve continuity while avoiding a constitutional crisis. Medvedev was that man. Backed by the full weight of Putin's political machine, he won the presidency with over 70% of the vote. Observers wondered if he would chart his own course, but the answer came quickly. Medvedev never sought to overshadow his mentor. During his presidency from 2008 to 2012, Putin stepped into the role of prime minister, yet the two remained in lockstep. Major decrees, strategic policies, even military actions were coordinated. Analysts in Moscow later estimated that virtually every major order issued by Medvedev was aligned with Putin, a level of unity rare in Russian politics. When his term ended in 2012, Medvedev did not resist or maneuver to stay in power. Instead, he quietly stepped aside, handing the presidency back to Putin and taking the prime ministership himself. The gesture cemented his reputation, a man of absolute loyalty, willing to absorb the burdens of leadership.
but never to challenge the ultimate authority of the Kremlin. To many in the West, this made Medvedev look weak, a mere placeholder. But inside Russia, it reinforced a different image. He was the right hand of Putin, the executor of sensitive missions, the man who could say and do what Putin sometimes could not. It was in this role that Medvedev grew most dangerous, not as an independent rival, but as the trusted operator within Putin's shadow.
For Dmitry Medvedev, few issues ignite his fury more than NATO. Since the early 2000s, he has railed against the alliance's eastward expansion, describing it not as defense, but as provocation. His words carried an edge of cold certainty. NATO was pushing its military frontier right up to Russia's doorstep. And the facts supported his anger. From 1999 to 2020, NATO admitted 14 new members, including Poland, Romania, and the Baltic states, nations that once sat firmly in Moscow's orbit. To Medvedev and the Russian security elite, this was no coincidence. It was a deliberate strategy to encircle Russia, to strip away its buffer zones, and to expose its western border to foreign troops and missile defenses. Medvedev turned this military logic into political thunder. In interviews, he warned bluntly, the prospect of Ukraine or joining NATO was like placing a knife against Russia's throat. These were not empty metaphors. To him, a neutral Ukraine, neither pro-Western nor openly anti-Russian, was the minimum condition for regional stability. That conviction hardened after 2014, when Russia annexed Crimea. Medvedev branded Kiev's leaders as Washington's puppets, manipulated to serve Western interests against Russia. For him, the Ukrainian conflict was not just about territory, it was about halting NATO's march eastward. When Moscow launched its so-called special military operation in February 2022, Medvedev stood among the first to frame it as a correction of distorted geopolitics. No longer president, but serving as deputy chairman of Russia's Security Council since 2020, he wielded a powerful voice in shaping strategic doctrine. In 2023, he shocked the world again, declaring that Russia could use tactical nuclear weapons if its survival would threaten. Western officials brushed it off as bluster, but analysts at the International Institute for Strategic Studies disagreed. They noted his words mirrored Russia's revised military doctrine, which explicitly allows nuclear use if the state's existence is at risk. And then, in May 2025, his threat grew sharper still. Writing on Telegram, Medvedev warned that if Ukraine provoked Russia on Victory Day, Kiev might not survive to see May 10th. Dismissed by some as a rant, his message carried a darker weight, for Medvedev has shown time and again that his fiercest warnings are rarely hollow. From the battlefields of Georgia to the frozen pipelines of Europe, from disputed islands to NATO's frontiers, his record is one of words followed by action. In a world crowded with empty diplomatic talk, Dmitry Medvedev remains one of the few who says exactly what he means and means exactly what he says.